Thank you, Chair. Representative O'Neill, I'm just wondering, are there, I was a union member for a long time, and I've also gotten an opportunity to work in the private sector, and I'm curious to know if you know of any employer that has a provision where they decrease pay for employees. I find that a little strange, and so I just wanted to know where that thought comes from, and if you know where an employee gets their pay decreased.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was a business owner. I recently sold my share, so I don't own it anymore, but there are plenty of businesses out there, especially those that depend on employees' productivity, like I was in the trades. So I owned a company that was a tile setting company, and if we didn't get out there and do the work, and if I didn't have highly productive employees, they were paid based on their productivity. So if they had issues, it is very possible that their pay would reflect those issues. If they were on probation for something, for some sort of violation, that could be coordinated with a pay reduction. It's something that businesses do all the time, and it could be the step before someone is actually fired. So it's an important thing, and it gets people's attention, you know, when they see it in their paycheck that their performance does not meet the standard.
Representative Omar.
Hudson, I think, did you have something?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Hudson. Was there a question for Mr. Hudson?
No, I think he was saying that he wanted to add something, so I didn't know if he had something to add.
Mr. Hudson, is there a response to the question? Do you have a response to that question?
Madam Chair, yes, ma'am.
Are you saying that you aren't aware of any businesses that decrease pay? Because that was the question.
Madam Chair, I think what Chair O'Neill perhaps could be referring to, there are some instances where the pay structure is different. So for an example, she'd indicated that she had come out of the towel industry. I'm not sure if these were commissioned employees who may have been on like an 80-20 split. In that instance, there is a situation where a pay might be reduced. Or if we have a supervisor who perhaps had a performance improvement issue or a behavioral concern, and we demoted this supervisor, that is an instance where pay might be decreased. But just an employee who has not been under some sort of performance improvement program having their pay reduced, I've never heard of that.
Well, Mr. Hudson, I think Representative Neal knows exactly what she says. And I think we've had a little conversation back here when the question was asked. I know Representative Uglem, do you want to speak to that point?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Omar, if you happen to be a salesman in this world, and you can be selling cars, you could be selling siding, you could be selling just about anything, and you are paid on commission. So if you don't sell anything, you don't make anything. So you can have good years, you can have bad years. Probably really one of the best examples is a real estate agent. So it's the idea that people can make less money year to year, not to mention all the bonus situations that are out there in industry. It happens. It happens a lot. It doesn't necessarily happen, you know, here in the public sector, but it's pervasive and very, very common in the private sector. Thank you.
And I'd like to add that in the private sector as well, people, if they are not performing at their job, get demoted, and with that demotion comes a pay cut. And that's not even related to being in a commission position, that's just in a regular position as well. Representative Omar.
I think a commissioned position is very different than what we are discussing today. And I,
Representative Omar, I mentioned the fact that it's not just limited to commission. It's also for anybody that is demoted. So you can be in a regular job, not part of a commission situation, but if you're failing to perform, you'll get demoted, and then you get a pay cut with it. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. So I know Representative O'Neill has that experience having owned a business, and so I think she was speaking to that.
Is that anti-Semitism has no place in the United States Congress. And Congressman Omar is terrible what she said. And I think she should either resign from Congress or she should certainly resign from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. What she said is so deep-seated in her heart that her lame apology, and that's what it was lame, and she didn't mean a word of it, was just not appropriate. I think she should resign from Congress, frankly. But at a minimum, she shouldn't be on committees, certainly that committee. And with that, we're going to have a meeting. Our cabinet is doing really well, I tell you.
Thank you. Secretary Kelly, included in the President's budget is a provision that says, quote, the Secretary of Homeland Security may condition a grant or cooperative agreement awarded by the Department of Homeland Security to a state or political subdivision of a state for a purpose related to immigration, national security, law enforcement, or preventing, preparing for, or protecting against or responding to acts of terrorism. Specifically, the budget authorizes the Secretary to condition grants on compliance with any lawful request by DHS to detain an alien for a period not to exceed 48 hours. Are you familiar with that?
I'm fairly familiar with it, yes.
I'm sorry?
Fairly familiar with it, yes.
Grants that are subject to new conditions would include the Urban Area Security Initiative, a DHS grant that provided California last year with $124 million to help urban areas prevent, mitigate, and respond to acts of terrorism. This grant supports more than 100 incorporated jurisdictions in 12 counties in the Bay Area of California alone. It supports them to buy equipment, enhance systems, and conduct trainings so that localities can prevent, mitigate, and respond to acts of terrorism. Are you aware of that?
That's a good thing.
Another DHS grant is the State Homeland Security Grant Program that provided California $60.2 million last year to support state, local, and tribal efforts to prevent terrorism and to prepare the nation for threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk to security in the United States. Is that correct?
I wish I had the same document I could read from as you do.
Are you familiar with this grant program in your department?
I'm familiar with the grant program.
And are you aware that there are a number of federal courts that have imposed civil liability on local governments for complying with ICE detainer orders that were not supported by probable cause? Can you answer the question?
Am I aware of that?
Yes.
I am.
And in order then to comply with a 48-hour ICE detainer made with no probable cause, wouldn't that force the jurisdiction to choose whether to comply with a federal court ruling or forfeit vital public safety funds that are administered by your department?
I'm not a lawyer, but I think that federal law is federal law, state law is state law, and if you know, we have a different view of the impact of some of the state rulings, but I'm not.
Well, imagine, sir, if you will, that you were a local law enforcement leader presented with a choice of either complying with federal law that means that you may expose your department and your jurisdiction to civil liability, or forfeiting DHS funds that are designed and intended to help you fight terrorism at a local level. Wouldn't you agree that puts those law enforcement leaders in it's almost a Hobbesian choice?
Well, Senator,
how are they supposed to choose?
had you not cut me off, I would have said the same thing you just said. Probably not as eloquently, but I'd have said the same thing you said. I appreciate the fix they're in. I appreciate that they get their legal advice from the state and locals. And below the radar, we work with every police and sheriff department in this country to the degree that they can and are comfortable with.
Secretary Kelly, what do you mean below the radar? They have two choices, and they are accountable. Excuse me, sir. They are accountable to their jurisdiction, to the bodies that may have appointed or elected them. Right. And they have to make choices. What do you mean below the radar?
We talk to them on the telephone, and
And what are you instructing them to do when presented with those two
and
choices?
we tell them to, whatever they can do within the law, the interpretation, we're willing to work with them.
So are you aware that there are
You
local
let
law
me at least
enforcement?
finish once before you interrupt me?
Sir, with all due respect,
With all due respect, Senator.
are you instructing local law enforcement leaders that they can overlook a DHS or detainer request so they're not exposed to criminal liability?
We talk to them about whatever they're comfortable with, whatever they think they can do within the interpretation of their local attorneys general, as an example, or local lawyers.
So when they're
Let me finish
instructed,
once,
excuse
Senator,
me, I'm asking the questions.
but I'm trying to answer the question.
When they tell you, as I know local police chiefs are being told, that it would expose their municipality to civil liability if they comply with the detainer request, are you telling them that you will not withhold the DHS federal funding that they rely on?
Okay, before I start to answer, will you let me finish?
If it's responsive to the question, of course.
We talk to them on the phone and tell them whatever they're comfortable with, whatever they can do within the interpretation of their local lawyers or legal advisors, we'll work with them.
So are you willing to then not withhold federal funding when police chiefs tell you that they cannot comply with the detainer request because they've been told by their lawyer that they will expose their jurisdiction or their department to civil liability?
I'm willing to work with them in any way I can within the law, federal and local law, whatever they're comfortable with. I don't make threats to people, Senator.
Thank you.